My name is John Clarkson. I am the Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at OBI, and I am pleased to welcome you to tonight's talk, Optimizing the Adult Brain. First, I acknowledge that the Ontario Brain Institute's office and the St. James Cathedral event venue are located in Toronto on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We are grateful to live and work on this land. As an organization focused on brain health, we have learned much from Indigenous ways of knowing, especially about holistic approaches. Indigenous cultures emphasize the interconnection between mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional well-being, which aligns with our topics tonight. As you will hear from our panel, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to brain health in adulthood. Neurological resilience and adaptability require a lifelong commitment that takes a balanced and integrated approach to well-being. That's why OBI is dedicated to improving the lives of the 1 in 3 people affected by brain disorders, whether they are living with a condition or are a family, friend, or caregiver. Our collaborative team science approach brings together clinicians, researchers, technology innovators, community voices, and individuals with lived experience to ensure that our work has real-world impact. And accordingly, we design our public talks to educate, inform, and empower people from all areas about the life of brain health. Over 11 years ago, at the age of 58, when most of my friends and colleagues were thinking of retirement and mourning the fact that they missed their Freedom 55 window, I decided instead to look for new challenges. At that time, I was a deputy minister in the province of Manitoba, a position I held for over 16 years. I've worked for 3 different premiers and with 11 different ministers. It was time for something different, somewhere I could continue to make a difference in people's lives, something that was in the broad-based innovation space. And that led me to the Ontario Brain Institute. Why OBI, you might ask? Well, many reasons. But a few key reasons were that brain-related innovation activities were in their infancy, and OBI presented a model that covered the full spectrum of innovation activities, from knowledge creation to knowledge translation through to knowledge implementation. And most importantly, OBI's model put people at the center of its activities. It is built right into the reason for our existence. We are here to improve the brain health of people. Our research work is focused on clinical research. People are part of every research program, and they are supported and influenced by patients and their caregivers. Our technology development initiatives engage people and their community supports in the testing of technologies to ensure that they have real-life evidence behind them. We engage with healthcare providers across the system of care to change policies and care practices. We engage with communities of people through programs to support the evaluation and growth of their services, and we engage with people through education and awareness, items like our public talks. Our first public talk was in April 2014, and since then we have had almost 40 public talks and engaged with, in various ways, over 40,000 people as part of these public talks. The talks have ranged from technical topics like stem cells and deep brain stimulation to our current series on brain health across the lifespan. Through all of these initiatives, we have and will continue to put people at the center of what we do. I am proud to have been part of these efforts, and as I move to retire in January of 2025, grateful for all the support of the staff and the communities of people who have helped make OBI a success. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce a longtime collaborator of OBI and a good friend of mine, Inez Jabalpurwala. Last year, OBI formed several new international partnerships, including one with the Brain Health Nexus, which aims to develop a tool to measure brain health, similar to growth charts for children or heart health indexes. As executive leader of the Brain Health Nexus, Inez brings extensive experience in building teams and cross-sector collaborations. She is the former CEO of Brain Canada and currently serves as Global Director of Vinex. As part of this work, she joined the Brain Health Nexus, an international collaboration aimed at preventing brain disease. Their initial focus is to create a global brain health index, which will measure brain health indicators across the life course. Inez, welcome to the stage.
Thanks so much, John. And I can't picture you retiring ever, because you will always strike me as this sprightly and constantly intellectually curious person. So thanks for the introduction, and thank you all for joining us for this timely discussion about brain health. As John mentioned, I started my career a long time ago, in 2001, and over the past 2 decades, I've seen 3 important paradigm changes that have happened in the field. First, from fragmentation and silos of diseases, disciplines, and institutions to a more unified vision of the brain as one interconnected system, and correspondingly a more collaborative and coordinated ecosystem. Second, from the brain as a closed system to an understanding that the brain does not exist in isolation. It is impacted by the rest of the human system, by our environment, and by our lifestyle, and it changes across the course of our lives. And most recently, from a deficit or healthcare approach to an asset or health promotion approach of prevention, wellness, and optimization. And under this paradigm, brain health is more than the absence of a disease, and it's what we want to achieve for every citizen in the world. Now, as the founding CEO of Brain Canada, I had the privilege of working with the late Honorable Michael H. Wilson and with Alan R. Taylor and Rupert Duchenne to build a national organization to advance excellent and innovative research on the brain. But in the beginning, the organization was called Neuroscience Canada because brain research was narrowly focused on this one field. But in 1990, the US had declared the Decade of the Brain, and what followed was unprecedented attention and investment in research to understand the brain and brain disorders. And this led to a recognition that the brain is actually one complex interconnected system. And studying the brain involves different fields and disciplines beyond traditional neuroscience. It also meant that the disease silos that had fragmented research, funding, and policy were being replaced by a more holistic vision of the brain, where there are common underlying mechanisms across brain disorders. And therefore, to accelerate research and to achieve better outcomes, we needed to connect all those who are working in the brain ecosystem with common purpose. This was an approach that I called One Brain, One Community. One Brain, One Community allowed us to better understand the combined direct and indirect health, societal, and economic costs of brain diseases, disorders, and injuries, which are greater than cancer and cardiovascular disease combined. I left Brain Canada in February 2020 after nearly 2 decades, $130 million raised, $200 million in matching funds from the federal government, $250 million invested in more than 1,000 scientists at 115 institutions across the country and encompassing 75 different disciplines. But despite that record, during that period, our understanding of the brain had expanded to recognize that the brain may be one system, but it's not closed. The brain does not exist in isolation. It's impacted by the rest of the human system. So, for example, the heart-brain or gut-brain connection that you may have heard of. It's impacted by the external environment, and it's impacted by our lifestyle. So in the case of dementia, for example, research shows that 40% of dementias can be prevented or delayed by targeting 12 risk factors across the lifespan. And so it was serendipitous when in March of 2020, just as the pandemic was reaching its full force, I was approached by business leader Ken Irving to begin a new venture to understand how SARS-CoV-2 might impact brain health. This work grew to a focus on the phenomena of long COVID, because even though there have been more than 200 reported symptoms, many of the most persistent are neurological and psychological. We brought together virologists, immunologists, and brain scientists and partnered with lived experience groups to co-lead the development of a long COVID action plan for Canada. And most recently, Vinex has taken a broader view to explore the intersection of the environment and brain health. And I've joined with a neuroclimate working group led by Dr. Burchin Ikiz in the US. We know that climate change and pollution are impacting our brain health and that these impacts are different in different countries around the world. Now, the pandemic had put a spotlight on how a virus could impact cognitive and mental health and therefore quality of life. But this brought focus to another shift that was happening, flipping the script from a singular goal of understanding, treating, and finding cures for diseases, which is a deficit or healthcare approach, to a broader focus on prevention, wellness, and optimization, an asset or health promotion approach. And with that, a recognition that there is biological and non-biological variability in the brain as we age through our life course. And so we made a move from looking at generalized populations to more personalized individual interventions. And with a focus on brain health as more than just an absence of disease, we all have a stake. Because when our brains are not in optimal health, human capabilities, creativity, resilience, and productivity are all reduced. And this is what led me to the Brain Health Nexus, which had been initiated by Dr. Magali Haas. She's the founder of the US-based Cohen Veterans Bioscience. The mission, as John said, of Brain Health Nexus is to build a new paradigm of collaboration to unleash science and technology to optimize brain health and prevent brain disease. And the initial goal of the BHN was to develop a roadmap for an index to measure and monitor brain health across the life course, similar to a heart health index. We're now at an inflection point for brain science with a conversion of many different fields and disciplines coming together at the intersection of technological advances and research, and with a move towards open access, data sharing, and AI tools for data analytics. There's much promise for discoveries that will be translated into preventing disease, maintaining cognitive health, and personalizing approaches for diagnosis, treatment, and care. And we now have a more global, collaborative ecosystem where Canada is playing a consequential role in advancing brain health. We are a leader in brain science, home to big discoveries and a culture of team science. And this dates back to 1934, when Wilder Penfield founded the Montreal Neurological Institute and Hospital. But since that time, brain research centers have opened across the country. And with the establishment of the Ontario Brain Institute in 2010, Ontario has become a major hub for collaborative world-class research and translation and commercialization to achieve better outcomes for people. OBI is connecting researchers, patients, companies, and policymakers. The 1990s were the decade of the brain, but we are now ushering in the next era of brain health. I now want to introduce tonight's moderator, Dr. Krishana Sankar. She's a molecular and cellular biologist with a PhD from the University of Toronto. Krishana is a researcher and science communicator, passionate about dispelling health and science misconceptions in person and on social media. Krishana and panelists, welcome. We're keen to hear your insights into how we can optimize our brain health from your respective areas of expertise. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Inez, for that amazing introduction, and welcome to everyone this evening. So as your moderator, I will be moderating a 45 to 50-minute panel with our phenomenal panelists. So for those of you watching us via live stream, to send us your questions, you can use the chat function on the right side of your screen, or you can email us at communications@braininstitute.ca. For those of you here with us in person, when you have a question, please raise your hands if you can. And members of the OBI team, they're around the room waving at us right now. They will pass you pencil and paper, pen and paper. Please hand it back to them at the end with your noted question. You can also email us at communications@braininstitute.ca. Just an important note and message that our panelists today cannot give medical advice. Okay, now allow me to introduce our panelists. First, we have Ariel Garten, creator of the Muse headband, designed to support brain health. Ariel is dedicated to creating accessible tools to help people track and improve their brain. Ariel, welcome to the stage. Next, we have Dr. Fabiano Gomes, assistant professor in psychiatry and behavioral neurosciences at McMaster University, academic psychiatrist at St. Joseph's Healthcare Hamilton, and member of the Canadian Biomarker Integration Network in Depression. Fabiano specializes in bipolar disorder and treatment-resistant depression. Welcome to the stage. Next, we have Andrew Comte, Knowledge Translation and Research Manager at the Mood Disorders Association of Ontario and co-lead of the Canadian Biomarker Integration Network in Depression's Community Advisory Committee. Andrew advocates for including lived experience in research. Welcome to the stage, Andrew. Next, we have Elise Herzig, Executive Director of JIAS, Jewish Immigrant Aid Services, Toronto, a settlement agency that has been serving newcomers and refugees for over 100 years. Elise has exponentially grown the agency's clients, programs, revenues, and partnerships. Welcome to the stage. And last but not least, Dr. John Leddy, clinical professor and sports medicine physician at the University of Buffalo's Jacobs School of Medicine. John is a member of OBI's Transcendent Concussion Program, focusing on evidence-based evaluation and treatment of concussion and post-concussion syndrome. Welcome to the stage. All right, so hello panelists, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure I speak for many of us when I say I'm really keen to hear you all speak on your different points of view about the brain research, neurotechnology, and the role of community in the delivery of care. I hope to first set the stage by noting that there is no one-size-fits-all, as was mentioned earlier, to optimize adult brain. However, I feel confident and that our audience members will discover many nuggets of wisdom to take away tonight about managing brain health with or without a brain disorder. So let's begin. Grounding this talk in research, John, let's start with you. I'd love to hear about the latest discoveries in concussion care and understand what we might be able to apply to brain health in general.
As a token American, I was told I didn't have to answer any questions. But okay. Yeah, so I guess most apropos to this topic of brain health is that maybe up until about 10 years ago, or a little sooner, people thought that after a brain injury like concussion, you probably shouldn't do anything to make the symptoms worse. It was thought that if you did something, including going for a walk or reading something or looking at your screen, and your symptoms went up, that was harming your brain and delaying your recovery from the brain injury, from the concussion. So the advice was to rest until your symptoms go away, avoid sort of social interaction, exercise, anything that would tax your brain. And that works for some people who are going to recover naturally anyway within a week or two. But there's a pretty significant minority, about 30% of people who get a concussion, who don't recover spontaneously. And working at the University of Buffalo with my mentor, who's a Canadian, Dr. Barry Willer from Fort Erie, who's been was UB professor for 45 years, we decided to take a different approach because we were dealing with athletes, and athletes like to be active and exercise. So we sort of took the model from cardiovascular rehabilitation and applied it to the brain and decided to test people's symptom exacerbation on a treadmill and then give them a heart rate below that where they got their symptoms went up and use that to rehabilitate them. And lo and behold, that worked. really lucky. I take no credit for it. It just happened. But what that's done is change sort of the paradigm of how we manage concussion now. So instead of telling people not to do anything, we tell them to start doing things right away, but in a controlled way. And if you think about the blood vessels to your heart and to your brain, they're basically the same vessels. So anything that's good for your blood vessels, like aerobic exercise, is good for your heart and for your brain. So brain health really is cardiovascular health in general. So now I don't mean for people who aren't athletes that they have to become athletes after a concussion to get the benefit. If they just get up and start walking around and go outside, go for a walk, walk on a treadmill, very light things initially. And you don't want your symptoms to go up too much, that's not good, but a little bit's okay. That's been one of the revelations of the research, is that it may be that your symptoms have to go up a little bit for your brain to recover faster. I use the analogy, if you sprain your knee and you go to a physical therapist, it kind of hurts to move it, but you have to move it to heal it. And it's the same with the brain. So that's been probably the biggest change in the past 10 years or so, is that aerobic exercise is not just good for your heart and your brain to prevent disease, it's good for helping people recover from brain injury.
Oh, great. I know I'm personally really happy to hear that. I know some folks who typically are very active, they might get a concussion, and then one of the first things they're told typically by their GPs is to rest. But having, like you were saying, some mild to moderate activity is good in terms of helping with the concussion and recovering from it.
That's right.
Great, thank you so much. Coming back to exercise, so we know it's not obviously necessarily a magic bullet, but it can be used, as John just said, to complement treatment. But we also know it can be used to complement treatment for mood disorders like depression and anxiety. So Fabiano, can you tell us about your research in this area?
Yes, of course. So my research has been focusing mostly on lifestyle interventions and also knowledge translation. Knowledge translation is this that we're doing here, trying to get the research data to be implemented in clinical practice. And regarding lifestyle, the main thing is that as a psychiatrist, we are always trying to make the best assessment, to come up with a plan for a patient. We now have really good treatments, medication, psychotherapy, evidence-based psychotherapy. We have technological resources like RTMS, deep brain stimulation. There are quite effective treatments. We've been fortunate to have funding from OBI, Health Canada, Brain Canada, for example, to support a number of different studies and current studies that you've been seeing on the slides that are currently recruiting to try to address how to best serve our patients with depression. However, a lot of patients, they do not respond to traditional treatments, or they are not interested in taking the medication or eventually even doing therapy. And people are more and more interested in learning about new types of treatments. And lifestyle medicine has been something that has been quite highlighted right now. As Dr. John mentioned, we have a lot of issues related to cardiovascular health and brain health. So we know that it's integrated, right? And a lot of studies have shown that people with depression, they show a pattern of accelerated aging, right? So the same findings we have in the brain as we age, we can find in younger people with depression. So we've been studying what's happening with someone that is depressed with time that leads to these differences in their brains. And also we are trying to understand what's the effect of our different interventions. So there's a parallel of how depression acts in the brain and how the normal aging process. And we're thinking how we can do to actually prevent or eventually reverse those processes, right? And this might lead to helping people with depression to live better, but also how to better age with our brains. And this effect of lifestyle has been the most important thing, and I'm sure you will hear about this a lot tonight. And so we know that some specific interventions that we can do on a daily basis that would help people with depression can also help people that are our brains and whoever is interested in having a healthy brain. I'll talk about a bit about a couple of them, and nutrition, diet, and exercise are main interventions that we can do. Physical activity increases the cardiovascular health, the cardiovascular tonus, the brain oxygenation, and this is well known to improve depression and also to prevent a lot of this aging that we see prematurely in patients with depression. And also the effect of diet and nutrition. We know that the Western diet that we usually, unfortunately, most of us would adhere to the Western diet with a lot of highly processed foods, sugary drinks, not a lot of vegetables or fresh fruit, for example. It's associated with worse outcomes, both related to depression, anxiety, across the lifespan. So those are at least two of these lifestyle factors that we are investigating as new approaches to treatment of depression, but we're confident that this will also lead to better brain health in everyone.
Great. Little sad about the processed food. I mean, I really like my donuts, so hopefully
All in moderation, right?
all in moderation. You did mention something in the beginning of your answer. You said RTMS. Would you just mind very briefly explain
Of course. So it's repetitive transmagnetic stimulation. It's a specific type of neurostimulation technique that's been used for study of the brain, but also as an intervention that can be used for people with depression.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Okay, so Andrew, to you next. You also work in the mental health space at Hope and Me organization, and as a member of a community advisory committee established to inform scientists about how to prioritize patients in research, a really important topic and a topic close to my heart as well. So what are you currently seeing come up in the community in terms of pressing needs? What can people do if they need immediate help or support while they're awaiting care? Because we know waiting for mental health care can take a really, really long time.
That's a really very important question. From the community perspective, we've been finding it very kind of challenging for a lot of our clients accessing mental health care, especially with certain groups, specifically with younger folks kind of going through school. There's still so much kind of stigma around talking about mental health, and also with older adults and sort of racialized communities. Like living in a big city, it's maybe a little bit easier to access care, but in smaller communities, it can also be very kind of challenging. So we were actually nimble as a community agency. During the pandemic, we were offering many programs in person, but we were actually very nimble. So we're actually now using more of a hybrid model, mainly virtual programs, but we were able to reach a lot of the smaller communities and definitely kind of focus on programs for younger folks. Way back in school, if you're kind of bullied, you're kind of just bullied within your own, high school or public school. But now with like social media, it's kind of going everywhere. So it was kind of really important for us to kind of reach out to younger folks, and then also some of the older folks within the community. So one example is we do a lot of public education types of talks and focus on disseminating information to the public. And then also, with a lot of older folks, there's still kind of stigma around accessing care. So it's kind of really important for us to provide that information. We've been doing a workshop series focusing on older adults and mental health on different topics like depression, bipolar disorder, navigating the healthcare system, and also understanding what your rights are in terms of confidentiality, privacy. So it's kind of very important for us to sort of provide that evidence kind of based information so that they're able to navigate all the different services. And then we've also partnered with other community agencies. One thing that we've done is we've been implementing a number of workshop series with the Toronto Public Library. So they're one of the most amazing places in terms of accessibility. So we've been doing that both virtually and in person. So a couple of things to kind of consider from the community perspective in terms of accessing care.
Great. And just to confirm, the workshops at the Toronto Public Library are to help folks navigate the healthcare system in terms
Yeah,
of
that's
getting
actually
help.
one of the topics, but they're basically 1 hour workshops on different topics. So one of them is navigating the care system, but also one's on depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety disorder. And what's great is if you're a caregiver where English isn't your first language, we're able to provide them with a summary in multiple languages as well.
Great, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so that actually leads in to Elise. So you are also coming from an organization that provides resources and supports, including ones that pertain to mental health to members of the community, most notably newcomers to Canada. So can you tell us what the services are that you offer at JIAS?
Great, thank you. First of all, it's so nice to be here today because I have a huge, huge debt of gratitude to the Ontario Brain Institute for the support they've given us. So our agency is over 100 years old, and our mandate is really to help remove barriers so people, when they come to Canada, can settle. So some of our services are fairly straightforward. They're simple: learning English, how to do banking, what are the steps I need to do to get a job, how do I register my kids in school. And some of those take place in person, some in a hybrid model. And when they're hybrid, with the use of technology today, we can use lots of languages so people, whether they speak Urdu or Spanish or Turkish, they can get the information in the language they need. A second set of services we do are more tailored to the individual or family that comes to Canada. And we do a settlement plan, and we ask them questions like, what do you want to do in Canada? Like, what's your dream? What are your goals? And what are the things that are stopping you right now? And for almost all of our clients, it's about housing security, it's about food security, it's about getting their kids settled, and preferably not having a survival job. The mental health piece is really difficult. No one comes to JIAS saying, I'm dealing with mental health in my family. For some of our clients, because of the countries they come from and their cultures, mental health is still a very big stigma. But the other big component that any newcomer that comes to Canada faces is they've left behind their family, their friends, their community, their economic networks, and they have to start from scratch. And they're lonely, and they're also ashamed of saying that they don't know what to do, because many of them, even if they come here as a government-assisted refugee or a privately sponsored refugee, and they have their papers here, they're afraid if they tell someone they've got a problem, they're going to be sent back. And if the stigma of mental health is associated with that, that's really difficult. So initially, we started to do mental health programs for the Yazidi community. Most of the people we were helping were women whose husbands, fathers, brothers had been killed. Many of them had children still in captivity. Many of the women we were helping actually were not raising their children, but it could be it could be a niece, it could be a child of a friend. Some of them didn't know the fate of their family members. So imagine the mental health they're going through, all the issues. But the biggest challenge this community had is that they lacked the ability, they were illiterate in their own language and numerically. So if you gave them $100 and that was for them to spend, they didn't know the difference between 100 and 10. And if you want to give them information that was written in Kurmanji, which is very hard to get translators in Kurmanji, they couldn't read it. And so when we had to approach mental health programs for this community, we actually started off giving them a workshop where women could come together and talk about their kids coming to school. And in that safe environment, they made community. And we were able to talk to them about what do they stay up at night and worry about. And we were able to slowly start to address mental health issues. The problem with our program, even though it was innovative, first of its kind, we were measuring bums in seats, because that's what our donors tended to ask us for. And then we would do a satisfaction survey to see whether or not they want to continue. And through the support we got from the Ontario Brain Institute, we started to think about this very differently. What are the outcomes we want to achieve? And we started to do focus groups in advance, and we embedded evaluation at the front end of our mental health initiatives. And when we applied for our OBI Geek grant, we thought we were going to be helping the Yazidi community and the Afghan community. Little did we know that we'd have to support a Ukraine community and other communities that fled to Canada. And it's really been a game changer for us. So thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Elise. That's an amazing resource, I hope. So basically, anyone can reach out and
Any
use this
newcomer that
resource.
is in Canada, open work permit, permanent residence. I think we represent today people from over 30 countries, and we speak over 17 languages. The other big change that we did is really trying to find mental health professionals in the languages of the clients that we have. A lot gets lost in nuance. We had a tragedy with a Yazidi client where the family kept on telling us the young man had a headache. He was fighting severe depression. You know, and so even though we had a Kurmanji translator, because they didn't talk about mental health, it was how they understood it to be. So we've really adapted our program significantly.
Great, thank you so much for that, Elise. And finally, we need to bring Ariel into the conversation. And so a little bit earlier, we mentioned the use of technology, especially along with treatment, looking at mood disorders. So in the 21st century, obviously, it's hard to imagine no one using technology. I'm currently with an iPad. So, you know, Ariel, you use science-backed evidence in the development of neurotechnology that improves brain health. And you are the creator of Muse Headband. What is Muse Headband, and what does it do?
So, what you're looking at here is actually a brain reading device. It's an EEG. So many of you have heard of an EEG. You'd go into a hospital, they've put sensors all over your head with lots of goop and wires that go across the room, and then your physician or nurse would interpret that data. This is actually a clinical grade EEG. It's widely used in neuroscience research, and it just fits in the palm of your hand. So this device is actually widely accessible not just to researchers, but also to the general public. There's 500,000 of them out in the world. And for most people, the most common application is a meditation tool. So when we look about brain health, there are several pillars that we've heard about. One is exercise, diet and nutrition. The last two, community. And the last two pillars are sleep and meditation. These two things can fundamentally help you improve your brain health and manage your brain health as you age. Muse helps you with meditation by giving you real-time feedback on your brain while you meditate. So we all know meditation is supposed to be good for you, but it's really hard to do. You sit down and you're like, okay, I'm ready to meditate. I'm here. This is going to be glorious. And then your brain kind of bounces all over the place and you're like, what am I supposed to be doing? There's no like little coach inside your head telling you what to do. So with Muse, we realized with a brain reading accessible technology, we could change that and actually give you real-time feedback on what's going on in your brain while you meditate and guide you to do it right. So the Muse meditation application actually translates your brain activity into guiding sounds. So when your mind is wandering, when you're not meditating, you hear it as stormy. And as you come to quiet, focused attention on your breath into the meditation state, it quiets the storm. And so you get this beautiful real-time feedback letting you know when you're meditating in reinforcement for getting into the right state. And then after the fact, you get scores, charts, graphs, things that actually show you what your brain, as well as your heart and your body, were doing moment by moment.
Great, thank you so much for telling us some more about the Muse Headband. So how can good sleep and solid meditation habits actually help to improve our brain health then?
So meditation is incredibly important for brain health for multiple reasons. One is because it's huge for stress management. When we talk about mental health, most of us have voices, little things going on in our head that are constantly telling us that, you know, we're not good enough, we forgot this thing, oh no, oh no. That causes stress, physiological stress in the body, stress in the brain, and if you have a depression or clinical anxiety, then those negative pathways are overly reinforced over and over again. Meditation as an intervention helps you to objectify the contents of your own mind and be able to say, hey, brain that's telling me these crazy things, mind that keeps saying this, you can stop. I have a choice. I don't need to listen to you. I can bring my attention elsewhere. And so with this kind of training, doing it over and over again, you learn to be able to quiet your mind and at the same time quiet your physiology, breathe deeply. And when you do so, it has a dramatic improvement not only in your mental health, but also in your physical health.
Great, thank you so much. So I just want to remind the audience to please send us your questions. Again, you can use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen for those of you joining us via live stream, or you can email us at communications@braininstitute.ca. So now we'll take some audience questions. Shall I begin? Yes? Oh, I see there's one here. So we'll be passing, if you folks have audience questions, in the live audience, of course, just raise your hands. They'll come around with pencil and paper, and you'll be able to jot it down. They'll send it to me, and then I'll read it out. But I'll start with some other questions we've had submitted to us. So this one here, I think perhaps both John and Fabiana might be able to weigh in on this one. So someone in our audience mentioned that they're noticing a bit of cognitive debilitation. So they're noticing memory issues, cognitive deterioration. They mentioned they're nearing the age of 50. They're wondering where is the best place, or what is it that they can start to do to check their brain health?
To check their brain health?
Yes.
Well, I mean, one way to do that, if they're concerned about a cognitive issue, is to have a cognitive test by either a neuropsychologist or a speech-language pathologist. There are cognitive tests that are performed, varying lengths and degrees of sort of how far they go down into it, but basically they look for strengths and weaknesses and concentration, memory, planning, things like that, and then they can give you strategies to help rehabilitate that. That would be for somebody who's concerned that they may be having memory problems. I'd also suggest that person consults with his or her primary physician, because sometimes medical issues are the cause for memory problems as we get into our 40s and 50s. And I'm sure Fabiana can talk about the cognitive problems with mental health issues as well. So maybe you'd like to talk about that.
I would say that the first step would be to try to understand exactly what's happening. I mean, observe yourself, write down the symptoms, and go talk to your primary care provider. Here in Canada, it's mostly the family doctors, right? They would probably start by looking into if there is any type of physical issues, vitamin deficiencies, thyroid problems, and overall health issues that might be related to it. An important cause, especially in someone in their 40s, 50s, of cognitive problems are mental health issues. So anxiety disorders, depression, sleep problems, they might be quite related to, so it's a symptom, right? And not necessarily a primary problem such as we have in dementia. So usually the professional will try to rule out this type of physical issues that might be going on, and also mental health conditions that are usually related to this. Of course, if you are stressed, for example, your cognitive function will be decreased as well. So managing stress is also something that might help with cognitive function, especially if you don't have any other diagnoses.
Great, thank you so much. Another one I think that's close to all of our hearts. How does work stress impact our brain health? To anyone on the panel?
I'll start. So whether it's work stress or any form of stress, it can have a profound impact on the brain in multiple dimensions. One is this lovely area of our brain called the hippocampus. It's the part of our brain associated with learning and memory. It's super important. It turns out that cortisol can actually shrink the size of your hippocampus. So when we think about the impact of stress on our brain, it can have a real impact decreasing the size and therefore the capability of function of parts of our brain. We also have an increase in cortisol that runs through our body, which then leads to a tightening of our blood vessels, which then can increase your heart rate, cause high blood pressure issues. And as we've heard many times, our cardiovascular system and our cognitive systems are very closely linked. Stress can also lead to an increase in inflammation. Inflammation leads not only to interference in our neurocognitive regulation, but also in things like our hearts and our blood vessels. You get some plaques, some inflammation, then you have a heart attack. If that happens in your brain, it's called a stroke. And then, of course, work stress just kind of makes us crazy. All of the physiological things aside, it makes life feel unpleasant. And I think when we talk about what is brain health, we're thinking not just about the health of the organ, or not just about mental health as we talk about in terms of anxiety or depression, but we actually talk about what is it to feel flourishing in our lives, to feel agency, to feel accomplishment. And work stress in particular can tend to erode those senses of agency and safety and security, because we're like, oh no, what does our boss think about us? Am I going to be fired? Do they not think I'm good enough? And so, strategies that you can use to manage not just any stress, but work stress specifically include things like meditation, where you learn to calm your mind, distance yourself from the problem, feel a sense of self-fulfillment, and also other cognitive strategies like being able to talk to your boss, talk to supports in your community, have open communication with HR, because your work wants you to thrive. We often think our work just wants us to be, little widgets doing the job, but if the widget isn't working well, then it's not really helpful to the company either. So, come in from the position of I am someone who is worthy and valued by this organization, and hopefully your organization will help you gain perspective.
Great, thank you for that. Anyone else wanted to weigh in?
I'm going to pipe in from a different perspective as an employer of 92 employees, which may not sound a lot to some of you, but for an agency that's doubled in size and had to move from in-person to hybrid and changes the population. So when I came to JIAS, very small percentage, really a few families came without a plan. They were not fleeing a war zone or whatever and coming to us 2 days later. 70% of our clients today have fled a war zone. It's been a real change in our environment, and the clients that we're seeing are not going through post-traumatic stress disorder. It is ongoing stress. They've left behind loved ones. They don't know what's happening to them. They have guilt that they're here. They don't know how to bring other family members, and they don't know how they're going to go from A to B, and they stay up a lot at night and worry. So we come up with a lot of programs for our clients, but as an employer, one of the things that we've done is invest a lot in training for vicarious trauma for our staff. And it hasn't always taken the form I thought it would take. In the beginning, it was bringing in psychologists to work with them. We landed up bringing in a consultant that helped us actually learn about our own self-awareness. And we realized we were missing a big step. We were bringing in all these experts, but we did training on self-awareness. How do we deal with conflict in the workplace? Learning about our personalities and then sharing them with your teammates. So somebody who might be an introvert is not being lazy because they're not participating in a brainstorming session. They might actually be reflecting on it and want to come back with feedback afterwards. So we've really made a lot of investments in this area, and I can tell you it's still not enough. Our latest thing that we've actually been training our leadership team on, and we're going to be cascading it throughout the organization, is how to have courageous conversations with people that think very differently about you on issues. Because you spend more time sometimes with your colleagues than your family members. And if we don't have those skills, it's really difficult because then we bring home additional stresses.
Great, thank you so much for that. Actually, I wanted to focus a little bit more again on community, and this question is both for you, Elise, and Andrew. What have you both observed in terms of the role of community in supporting brain health? You both mentioned isolation and loneliness. So have you both noticed community, the sense of community, especially with the folks that you work with, having any sorts of improvement on brain health?
I think after the pandemic, or during the pandemic, isolation was something that actually came up quite a bit because people were very much isolated. They weren't able to sort of engage with community partners. So we're able to move into more of a virtual model. But we also, in terms of community programming, we look at it more from a holistic sort of model. So we focus on things like, one example, for instance, is we offer peer support for some of our patients at Sunnybrook. But one of the things that we actually like to do is we go for little walks and go for exercise, so they're not sort of within that hospital setting. We offer lots of mindfulness programs as well for older adults and younger folks. But it's really important. Basically, at our workplace, our motto is sort of talk to someone who's been there, because basically every board member, staff member, volunteer has either lived or been a caregiver of someone with a mental health challenge. So we want to make sure that we open up that conversation on a regular basis. We do kind of regular check-ins with all of our staff and volunteers, and we all often share little kind of self-care kind of tips. So those are some of the strategies that we use from a community setting.
So ours takes place in a couple of different ways. So one is at the onset of the Ukraine war, we created welcome circles for Ukrainians. So that they would see that there were Canadians that wanted to help them succeed. And these are people that could take them to figure out how to get an OHIP card to be able to help them register their kids in school. And that's really bringing community with the newcomer, and that's really important. So they feel like they're wanted, they're accepted, and they can also ask questions that they don't think about to ask when they're meeting with somebody from our organization. In the mental health space, when we run our programs, we'll bring, for example, an Eritrean family together at one of the Toronto Public Libraries or another facility like that. And what we do is we provide childcare, so the parents don't have to worry about that. We'll bring the husbands and wives together, and we will start talking about, let's say, life in Canada, and then we'll start digging in, and they can see that they can support each other. What came out of our recent program that we ran with the Ontario Brain Institute funding is the first series we did, we realized that the husbands were speaking in the sessions and the wives weren't speaking. And so when we ran the next series, we actually separated it, and we might start off with the men talking about what they need to do to improve their career, and then they would have 75 minutes on that and 75 minutes on mental health. And the women would have 75 minutes first on mental health and then 75 minutes on career. When people share something that you've been afraid to publicly say, and someone else says it in front of you, one, you don't feel alone, but two, as you say, you can ask them. And so the magic happens when someone in the community starts to mentor and help someone else. So while I love and I applaud all the, I think it's now 1,100 volunteers that work with us, there is something magical that you feel when you see a newcomer helping another newcomer. And that is a different form of community. So we'll do it, for example, with the Afghan LGBTQ plus community. They cannot go to an Afghan community of general public to feel like they're accepted because they're not accepted there. So sometimes we'll do subsets like that in communities, and then they form their own community, and it moves on and on, cascades forward.
Oh, thank you so much for that. And Andrew mentioned meditation, and so I'll come back to you, Ariel. So is there a certain type of meditation style that Muse is calibrated on, or does it support a variety of meditation styles? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So the first meditation type that we started with was focused attention meditation, and that's where most of the research is. In a focused attention meditation, you focus your attention on your breath, your mind wanders away, you then notice that it's wandered, and then you bring your attention back to your breath, which sounds incredibly simple, but typically how it goes is you're focused on your breath, your mind wanders to Facebook and this other thing and this other thing, and then you're like, what is this meditation thing? So that's your my mind is wandering, come on back to the breath. And when you do that, you notice that you're wandering and you return. That's the kind of rep at the gym for your brain. That's strengthening your attention, your ability to notice and refocus on something else. So we do real-time feedback mind meditation. We also have meditations for the heart, the breath, the body. We have over 500 different guided meditations, all within the app. And then we also have a whole other section for sleep. So sleep is one of the other incredibly important pillars for mental health. And so we have guided bio and neurofeedback experiences that actually help walk your brain into sleep. So for people who have difficulty falling asleep, it can help you fall asleep faster. And if you wake up in the middle of the night, it can actually help you fall back asleep. So it's been an incredible tool to help on multiple mental health fronts and brain health fronts.
Great. And so there's a follow-up question for you. Folks want to know, where can they get Muse and how much does it cost? And are there any dangerous side effects?
Awesome, all the questions. So Muse is commercially available. You can get it on Amazon. It's probably on Black Friday.
Black Friday
It's
sale.
definitely in Black Friday sale. Or you can go to our website, choosemuse.com, CHOOSEMUSE.com. I'd give you a discount code, but there's a Black Friday sale, so you can just go do that. The Muse 2 is, I usually talk in the US prices, so it's typically, I think it's like $199 US. And the Muse S is currently, so this is the one that does sleep. This one does meditation. This one does meditation and sleep. Both of them are clinical grade EEGs. They also have a PPG sensor, so it tracks your heart and your movement. And this one is somewhere around $350 US.
So, when you say clinical grade, can you explain what you mean by that?
Totally. So the EEG that you would use in a lab or in a hospital, this gets the exact same EEG signal. So this reads your brain waves just as effectively, but it doesn't use the goop, and it connects right to your smartphone. So it's been published in over 200 research studies to date, third-party studies. We actually have some collaborators, researchers in the room. And OBI is a big supporter, so thank you very much, OBI. There was a next question around safety, I believe?
Yes.
Yes, so it's passed all of its safety certifications. It's actually even used in pediatric overnight research, so it's used in place of a sleep lab with kids. So you know it's got to be safe.
Great. Thank you so much.
Specifically EMF effects?
Yeah, sure. So there's a battery on board, but it's incredibly low power. So this has gone through all of its testing. And then it connects via Bluetooth to your phone, but the antenna faces out and it's shielded at the back. So any signal to the phone goes out, and it is many, many orders of magnitude less than you'd get just from your cell phone.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so John, I want to come back to you. We've got a couple questions here, so I'll just start with this one. Folks want to know if they're more likely to get Alzheimer's disease if they've had a history of concussion.
So the answer to that is we don't really know if concussion leads to a dementia process like Alzheimer's. More significant traumatic brain injuries are a risk factor. So if you've had a more severe traumatic brain injury, or you're in a coma, or you had a bleed into your brain, that can be a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease down the line. People probably are thinking a little bit more about something called CTE with concussions. That's chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And there's some concern about that, especially in athletes who've played professional football and professional soccer, things like that, who've been exposed to thousands of repetitive head impacts over their careers. And there's a signal there in those athletes. What we don't know is whether that translates to people who played high school sports or college sports or recreational sports. That remains to be seen, and that's being studied right now. But if you've had one concussion or two concussions, I wouldn't worry about getting Alzheimer's disease later in life, unless there's other factors. And there's lots of other factors, genetics being a pretty strong one, but things like chronic loneliness, metabolic disease, vascular disease, depression. There are many, many factors that go into developing dementia later in life. So a concussion that you had maybe as playing high school sports probably is not really a risk factor for that.
And you know, I just realized something. So we're talking about concussion, but can you actually describe what a concussion is? What actually happens to the brain when someone has been concussed?
So basically, a concussion happens when your brain gets shaken up physically, whether that's being hit by an object or falling and striking your head. Your brain gets shaken up, and that mechanical force or energy gets transmitted to a metabolic disturbance in the brain. Okay, so there are disturbances in neurotransmitter release and blood flow to the brain, and something called autonomic function, which controls your breathing and your respiration. So it's sort of a metabolic crisis in the brain that happens, and as a result of that physiological insult from the mechanical injury, you get a series of symptoms that appear. And they have to appear within a certain time frame to be called a concussion, and that's 72 hours. So if a symptom appears after that time frame, it's generally not considered to be related to a concussion. But what do people experience? They experience headache, dizziness. They'll experience sleep disturbance later that night, for example. They may become anxious. They may feel foggy. They may be nauseous. There are about 22 or more symptoms that you can have after a concussion or a brain injury that causes concussion. So it's a mechanical jolt to the brain, becomes a physiological process within the brain, and that produces symptoms and also signs. Signs are what the doctor actually measures or observes through testing. And that's what a concussion is.
Thank you. I think that probably helps us to be able to distinguish a concussion versus some of the other things that you were describing, leading to potential diseases like Alzheimer's, for example.
I should say you don't have to be knocked out to have a concussion. If you are knocked out, you have, by definition, a concussion because you have a change in your mental status. But most concussions, at least in sports, do not involve any loss of consciousness. So sometimes that's a misconception that's out there. And I'm embarrassed to say this, there are some doctors that tell people because you weren't knocked out, you don't have a concussion. That's absolutely wrong, and they need some more education. But most concussions occur without being knocked out.
Wow, I didn't know that. So something new that I learned today. Thank you so much for that. One last one for you before I head over to Fabiano. Have you found that using physical rehabilitation methods to treat concussion is more effective in athletes compared to a non-athletic individual? Have there been studies to compare the efficacy of such concussion treatments in people with varying levels of movement or activity?
So, yeah, the answer is that controlled activity, early activity, whether that's, again, getting up and walking around or actually doing some aerobic exercise, is good for both athletes and non-athletes. It's particularly effective for athletes because they are bringing to the concussion a brain that's accustomed to exercise. And they have a very tuned and responsive autonomic nervous system, which is that system that's automatic. It's below our conscious level. It controls blood pressure, pulse, and the response to exercise. Now, adults who are not athletes will also respond to this approach, just not as quickly. And often, it's only one component of other types of interventions that non-athletes will require. Sometimes such as psychological interventions or interventions to treat disturbances in balance and things like that that occur after concussion. So the short answer is aerobic exercise is good for anybody who has a concussion. It works better and faster in athletes, but it's also a useful treatment part for treating adults who are not athletes who have concussions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. So moving over to Fabiano, we have a few questions for you as well. So folks would like to know if you can speak to the use of psychedelics in psychiatry.
Yeah, that's the second public talk I do in a week, and that this question always comes, right? I mean, Canada has been a leader in the psychedelics research, more modern psychedelic research. There's a lot of exciting data about psychedelics. Most of the patients have been treated with psychedelics in research studies are people with treatment-resistant depression, right? That's been struggling with multiple different treatments that failed those patients. They have difficult to treat depression, and they've been using psychedelics with positive results so far. We need what we call randomized clinical trials or double-blind clinical trials. That it's a real challenge to do with psychedelics. It's really hard to blind a trip or a psychedelic trip, right? To actually understand what are the exact effects of the psychedelic experience. there is a really interesting study out of CAMH now that it's testing psychedelics with a medication that actually blocks the psychedelic effect to see if the medication itself would change the brain activity or if you need the trip, let's say. So I think it's something that it's quite promising for the treatment of depression. There's a bit of setbacks. I mean, we had MDMA that was tried for PTSD. They thought that it would get approved in the US, and it wasn't. So there's still a lot of debate, both about the efficacy, safety, and safeguards that you need to psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, right? People are usually interested also in like microdosing of psychedelics. For that, we don't have evidence, actually, so there's some research on the topic, a lot of research, but no definite data, so I would keep into the regular psychedelic treatment with psilocybin, for example. And again, there are studies that are enrolling participants, so if you're interested, just Google it and you likely find some of the Canadian studies.
All right, you
That's
heard
a hot
it.
tip.
Yeah.
And then another question for you: tools and managing the symptoms of bipolar disorder. What are some of those? Yeah.
I think there are a number of different tips and tools. So first, I would like to acknowledge the important work of, for example, organizations like Hope and Me. We have out of BC the CREST BD group that is being funded also by major agencies. And these are groups that are led by researchers that have a particular interest in person-centered results, right? And they are quite collaborative with people with lived experience. And they have developed different apps. They have really interesting websites where they do offer a lot of tips. So for people with bipolar disorder, the main message is that it can be quite hard to stabilize their mood, right? For bipolar disorder, differently, if you compare with depression, for example, that depending on the severity of the depression, you may not be treated with medications. For bipolar disorder, we know that there is a major indication for use of medications, right? That are usually mood stabilizers, that can be anticonvulsant medications, medications for epilepsy, but also lithium, that it's the gold standard treatment for bipolar disorder. Some people, they do need other types of medication, but medication is quite important. So this is a major thing, right? And there's a lot of stigma in the community about the use of medication, about the manifestations of bipolar disorder that are related to both depression and mania or euphoria, right? Bipolar disorder, it's a disease of energy. So you have different types of periods where you have more energy, less energy, and the biological rhythms can be quite disrupted. So trying to bring balance to the life by balancing your biological rhythms, that includes sleep, appetite, sexual function. These are all important measures and interventions that we need to apply for people living with bipolar disorder. One thing we haven't talked much about is the use of substances, right? So I think either for optimizing the brain, sometimes we want that smart drug that will make our brain, we will be smarter, or will develop our brain, or some type of hormonal treatment, or a cognitive training that we'll get. We know that in order to optimize our brain, particularly if you have a specific mental health condition, it's important to prevent. So everything that you do to prevent the symptoms and new episodes, you are preserving your brain, right? And everything that is good for your heart, it's usually good for your brain. And things that we don't talk much that are good for the heart, but for example, to abstain from alcohol, to abstain from substances, smoking, these are also things that will help someone with bipolar disorder, but everyone in general.
So you mentioned efficacy, and there was a question about safety. And I know, especially during COVID, a lot of folks, especially if you didn't study science or medicine, you constantly heard about safety, safety and efficacy of vaccines, for example. So would you mind just explaining or expanding on what exactly you mean when you say efficacy and safety of a medication?
Okay, so for example, we were talking about the psychedelics, right? So in order to say that whatever intervention or whatever treatment work, we need to test it, right, against gold standards. So you know that something is better, that specific treatment that we have already established as the best treatment available. When we're discovering a new substance, or a new condition, for example, we usually treat that against placebo, right? Or it's something that is inert, that we don't have a specific effect. And then you see if people on that specific treatment that we're testing have better outcomes than the ones that are treated with no treatment or the placebo, right? So that's efficacy. So for efficacy, you need a specific design of a study that it's the randomized clinical trial. We can gather efficacy or effectiveness, that's the term we use, if something may help or not, from other types of studies, and sometimes we are not able to develop specific studies about efficacy, and then we go to these studies. For example, we can see that in a specific population, a treatment has been used and with some positive results, but you have a lot of biases that you need to take into account to actually understand if it's the efficacy of that specific treatment. So for example, with the psychedelics, it's really hard to know if the treatment is effective because it's really hard to compare with no treatment because you know that you didn't get the treatment because of the psychedelic experience. With antidepressants, you can have that issue too. If you have an antidepressant that has a specific side effect or a specific effect that you notice when you're taking it, it also can be quite difficult to actually understand if you took it or not, and this decreases the chance that we will find the real effect of that specific intervention.
Great, thank you so much for that explanation. So I now want to just come back. So these are all really great questions from the audience, so thank you so much. Keep sending them in. We have a bunch more here. I just wanted to take just a quick break from the audience questions just to ask all panelists this particular question. People want to know how can they optimize their brains. So for each of you, what is something that folks can do to optimize their brain health? And I'll actually start with Ariel.
Sure. I'm going to start with sleep. We're all like, oh, sleep, I got 7.5 hours, 6.5 hours, it's fine. Sleep is actually one of the most important things that you can do for your brain health, and you want to be sleeping consistently each night. So the basic rules for getting good sleep are go to bed and wake up at the same time every day. Now, if you already have something like insomnia, that it's very difficult for you to fall asleep, saying, okay, I'm just going to go to bed at 10 p.m. and then I'm just going to lie there for 3.5 hours and it'll be awesome. Like, that doesn't work. So if you truly have insomnia, you should really seek out interventions like CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, tools and technologies that can help you actually manage it. For those who just don't sleep particularly well and don't fall into the insomnia category, you want to make sure your rooms are really dark when you're sleeping. You want to start to synchronize your circadian rhythms. So that means turning off the lights before, kind of half an hour before you're going to sleep, dimming it down, being quiet and consistent in your sleep, and then how you wake up is really important. So your circadian rhythm depends on light. You've probably all heard of melatonin. Melatonin is the thing in your brain that starts to rise up as it gets dark that tells your brain it's going to be time to sleep. So you want your melatonin to be high, which is why you want to dim your lights before you go to bed, have it really dark when you sleep, and then in the morning you want to be really bright, and you want to open your curtains, which I know is kind of hard in Canada when it can be dark. Even use a full spectrum light if you need to tell your body, hey, it's morning time, and so it can reset itself for 16 hours later to get good sleep. The last thing I'm going to say is no caffeine after noon. It blocks something called your sleep pressure, which truly makes it hard to sleep. So like the number one intervention to sleep better is start by reducing your caffeine and not doing any afternoon. You might just discover that alone helps you sleep better.
Great, thank you. Fabiano?
I second Ariel. I think it's really important sleep, but I would say that as a psychiatrist, if you do have a mental health condition, make sure that you are being treated effectively, right? So always discuss if you are on the right medication, if you have been exposed to the right treatments, for example, evidence-based therapies, and have all the support you can get, right? And the second thing is to try to abstain of substances, including alcohol, cannabis, and smoking, as you can, because I'm sure that this will help your brain.
Great, thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, from a community perspective, we always sort of also focus on that holistic model. So things like sleep hygiene, community connections, also different sort of social supports. So sort of integrating that sort of holistic model, and even doing like short little walks. I think, I've never been one to do like a marathon or anything, but being able to sort of like chat with someone when you're going for like a little walk. So I kind of mentioned before, we've partnered with some hospitals where some of the inpatients will go for a little kind of short walks throughout a little park, and they can kind of chat with other people about what's kind of going on. And using those sort of community-based holistic models, I think, can be really helpful for someone living with different types of mood disorders.
Thank you. Elise?
So ours is two-pronged, I guess. One is we created during COVID something called an English conversation circle that people could connect with a newcomer and help them learn conversational English, the kind of stuff you do over a water cooler, just general talks, so that when our clients do go outside, and we recommend getting out and talking to someone, they have the confidence to start a conversation. And it was something we piloted during COVID and we thought would end, and it just has continued to grow and grow because people, even if they take an English language class, they want that opportunity just to be able to talk about things happening in their community. So that's been huge.
Great, thank you. And John?
Aerobic exercise. So the recommendations for general health are to get 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity aerobic exercise every week. And how do you do that? So that's roughly 30 minutes, 5 days out of the week, right? But it doesn't mean you have to go out and run for 30 minutes, okay? If you, like Andrew said, if you take a 10-minute walk 3 times a day, preferably with somebody you want to talk to, that's a little hard in the United States now, but you can get all the health benefits of somebody who's running, during that time. So again, for people who are not athletes, I know, you don't have to become an athlete to improve your brain health or your heart health. If you take 10 minutes 3 times a day, go for a little walk with somebody 5 days a week, you're getting what your brain needs. Now, if you want to do more, that's great. The benefits go up as the intensity of your exercise goes up. So more is better, but the worst is sitting. We know that. Sitting is actually a risk factor for heart disease now, as is loneliness. So the best thing you can do is take 10 minutes 3 times a day on most days of the week and go for a walk. If you want to do more than that, that's great, but you don't have to. So just be regular about it. Just be regular. If you're regular about it, it'll work. That's the key.
And then what about for those of us who have desk jobs, a lot of us, so we're sitting most times of the day. Is there any difference between sort of getting activity throughout the day versus, for example, I'll use myself as an example. I'm sitting most of the day, but I try to exercise 3 to 4 times a week. I love Zumba, by the way. Zumba is a good one. A little plug for Zumba there. So I love to dance, and I get an hour of dance twice a week, do some weights twice a week, something like that. Is that sufficient, or should we actually be breaking up our exercise throughout the day? Does it matter?
Well, what you're doing is good. So if you have a sedentary job and you can't get away from it, working out either before or after work is the way to go. But 2 things you can do if you have a sedentary job. One is you can get a standing desk, which I've had for 20 years or more. Now, that's not for everybody, and you'd have to get used to it, but you can break up sitting by they have ones that are rise up and then go back down. So you can break it up. Just if you stand for, say, an hour out of your 6-hour workday, that helps. Or breaking up your sedentary activity by going down and walking up the stairs a few flights. So breaking it up even a little bit is good. But you want to try to get that 30 minutes or so per day of walking or doing something active and breaking it up. If you can't do it at work, doing it after work is fine. But yeah, anything you can do to break up that continual sitting cycle that we can get into is helpful.
Great, and don't worry, we're going to be done soon, so you'll be all standing. Although the information has been amazing, and we still have a few more questions to go. I have another question, so just selfishly, this question is for me, but I'm just really interested, especially, John, you mentioned a bit of misinformation we heard earlier, and you addressed that, and so I would love to know from each of you what's a piece of misinformation that people or about or have heard about within your area of work or your expertise. And John, I will ask you for another bit. So I'll start with you and then we'll go down the line.
Okay, so one thing people say is, especially if they have a child that's been seen in the ER after a concussion or the office, they say, should I wake him up or wake her up that night? Because they're afraid if they go to sleep, they'll never wake up. But the point is that in the vast majority of cases, it's okay to let someone who's had a concussion go to sleep. They actually need sleep. Talk about sleep being good for your brain. It's also important for a good sleep to help heal a concussed brain. So you can let your child or your significant other sleep. If you wanted to check on them once during the night, just to make sure they were arousable, that's fine, but don't wake them up completely. Just make sure that they respond to you. But basically, there's no reason to keep waking somebody up during the night after a concussion or in the first few days after a concussion. Very, very few cases where that would be indicated. And if they have that severe a brain injury, they're probably staying in the hospital anyway. So that's not needed after a concussion. And in fact, it's important for kids especially to get good sleep after a concussion because it helps them recover faster. And disturbed sleep is one of the main symptoms after concussion. So we work a lot on what you were talking about, Ariel, sleep hygiene, getting them back into regular sleep schedules, using melatonin to help them sleep, limiting daytime napping, things like that.
Okay, thank you for that. Elise?
I think for newcomers, the fear that if they're legally in Canada, that if they go get mental health supports, it's going to affect their ability to become a citizen.
Wow. And so obviously that's not true.
It's not true, but I think what happens is depending on how someone comes into the country, if they're trying to go, for example, from permanent residence to get citizenship, they worry like, what if I do something wrong? Or you've got an open work permit and you're afraid, okay, and even if you're legally here for 3 years, you think if I go get help, maybe it's going to affect my work permit. It doesn't. But I think that's where, when you talk about misinformation, it's where do you get your information from? They don't come to us to ask that question most of the times because they're afraid to raise that question. They'll ask someone else who doesn't know, and it could be someone in a refugee camp in Iraq, and that we saw really happening during COVID when we tried to get Yazidis to follow protocols about getting vaccinated. They were getting information from people who had maybe one doctor for like 1,000 people who did not have vaccines available. So it's really trying to make sure that people understand that you can ask questions. So we've changed the way we ask questions. We might say, is there something that keeps you up at night? Is there something in your family narrative that can help us support you better? How do you feel about your kids in school? Like, we ask questions to help them, and then we show that these are resources that are available to the Canadian public. It's not just because they're a newcomer.
I wanted to add something there. So I have a vulnerable share. I have 2 children. After I gave birth to my son, I had terrible postpartum depression. And I was at Mount Sinai. They have, amazing maternal mental health care there. I had a psychiatrist, and she asked me, what are the thoughts in your head? And I refused to say anything because I was afraid if I told her the thoughts that were in my head, Children's Aid would come and take my child. And I am a mental health professional who's worked in the field for a long time. And even I was afraid to share what was on my mind because I thought I would be stigmatized in the incredibly safe space of the psychiatrist, who by the name had the same name as me, just random chance. Like, should have been an incredibly safe environment. So, this is, I'm sure, something that really comes up for people. I'm afraid to share about my mental health because I don't want to be stigmatized. But once you do, what ended up happening is she said, "Oh, did you have thoughts like this, this, and this?" And I was like, "How did you know?" She's like, "Because this is normal. Thank God." So once you do share, it cracks, it opens up the conversation and allows you to get the help that you need.
And that's why the group sessions are so important. Like if somebody needs one-on-one counseling, we will provide it, but we always try and get them in the group sessions first because all this stuff gets unearthed, and not only to each other, but for us. So then we take note and we say, okay, we need to do something on this, or we need to provide this service. But our clients are the best resources to find out what we should be providing them.
Thank you, thank you. So just in the interest of time, I'm so sorry. I will just ask you to share share the bit of information briefly and address it very briefly so we can just start to wrap up.
Share a little bit of...
Share a piece of misinformation you've
there's so much misinformation out there in terms of like mental health. So basically what we try to do from a community perspective is provide evidence-based kind of information through things like podcasts, through social media, and different types of lay summaries, and then let people know about media awareness so they know which sources are most appropriate for them.
Okay, thank you so much. And Fabiano, what's...
Yeah, I would say that, for example, that once you start a treatment for depression, for example, an antidepressant, you can't never stop it. So this is a misconception, right? Some people, they do have chronic depression and they need more treatment, that it's like a long-term treatment. But a lot of people, they do improve, and we are able to stop treatments, for example, and they recover completely. And also is because cannabis is more related, for example, to psychosis in adolescents, right? That if you pass that phase later on, it will be okay, and there are no harms related to cannabis use. But we know that especially for people with mood disorders, they can have a negative impact on the course of illness too.
Thank you.
I would say the common myth that I will bust is most people feel like, I can't meditate. It's fine for them. No way I could do it. But everyone here can meditate with the proper tools or structure. You too can do it and see the benefits in your life.
Great. Thank you all so much. So thank you all, everyone, for your phenomenal questions. We had a lot more, but just in the interest of time, I do have to wrap up. So I do want to say on behalf of the Ontario Brain Institute that I would like to thank, of course, each one of our panelists for sharing their expertise with us today. So let's give them a round of applause. And we also want to thank you here, you at home, for engaging with us tonight. Thank you so much. Give yourselves a round of applause. All right, so there will be resources to share with you for more information around this topic, and they'll be posted on the screen shortly, and a complete list is also available on the OBI website, braininstitute.ca, under resources. You can click on OBI Public Talks, and this will bring you to the Public Talks page. Your feedback, of course, is always extremely valuable to us. So for those folks at home, there's a survey link in the chat box. And for those of you here in person, you would have all received a printed copy. So please do us a favor and fill those out. Of course, that helps to design the talk so that it better benefits you. So share your thoughts with us about tonight's talks. So OBI Public Talks are also designed to share the latest knowledge on brain health and to offer some simple tips to manage both health and wellness. And our next talk is called Supporting the Elder Brain. It will take place in March of 2025. Oh my God, we're almost at 2025. We hope to see you then. So thank you, everybody, and good night.